Okay, cool. All right. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. These interviews are important to me because they're selfish. I'm selecting only people I want to talk to and interested to talk to. So I'm really grateful for your time. You bear no introduction like any other person I interviewed. People ought to know who Marcus McCoy is. Amazing blacksmith. I actually think you're far more than just that. But thank you so much. And yeah, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
I have, and I'm going to link all of your information below, and I have a lot of your items here on the desk to show as I talk here that I acquired over the years. I mean, I have a lot of your items. Your items are, to me, they are very interesting because I have a few other items from another blacksmith, but they don't bear the same energy and they don't bear the same magic. And I gotta say, there's sexiness in these items. I don't know if anybody told you this, but there's this, and when I say sexiness, they imbibed this libidinal, very strong life force energy, and it's very strongly felt in items. So I have a lot, obviously. I'm just only showing partial of my collection.
Oh, you got that one. That I like that one a lot.
Yeah, I have this one, this
Yeah.
great. Yeah, I have the Hecate torch, which was on my stamped altar, beautiful, which I already scorched in. And of course, your classic incense and your partner, Karamar, one of my favorite incense makers.
Yeah.
Her Hecate blend is amazing. So people definitely ought to know your things. To me,
you.
like I said, you're not just an average blacksmith. You are, the way I see you, Marcus, is a magician. If I even would go further and say a metal whisperer, the way you work is metal. And your work is embedded in principles of traditional blacksmith lore, folk magic, and real alchemy. That's a lot of tradition right there. Do you think that today all of these routes of tradition and heritage are dying out, or do you think they're on revival?
Yes, I think that they were dying out. I think there's been a resurgence in the occult, as well as in folk magic traditions and folk art traditions as well. I think that um, the internet has made that very possible. I think that um, the current money holders in our society tend to be people in the tech industry, and they don't really have any time other than what they're doing typically, because I know what it's like for them. I mean, we live in Washington State, so we know lots of people that are tech workers, and
Yeah.
a lot of them work within those a particular way that the tech industry sets it, where you work like a mad dog for a very prolonged period of time, and then you've got your downtime, and you're usually in your apartment or home or what have you, and you want to surround yourself with things that represent your values and your beliefs and things like that, and your interests. And I think that in also people want status, and they want things that are, that represent, a sense of accomplishment. And by status, I don't mean that in a negative way per se, but this is something that humans have always done. They buy nice things or things that represent their values, and I think that uh, handmade items become very popular because they indicate things that uh, you can't just go and buy at the IKEA or at the mall or whatever. And so when you see times of great financial boom throughout history, you also see artisans and artists also bloom. You see them supported by the economy. And I think that it's the same thing, whether it's we discovered a new spice in some other country, and you know, or tulips, or whatever it is that's making people money, that filters down, trickles down to the artists and artisans and societies. And I think right now, whether it's food or anything that's handcrafted, I think people want those things. They want, especially in a technologically driven industry,
Yeah.
I think people want things that represent, simplicity that's somewhat sets the mood differently from what they're doing. So, people turn towards magic, people turn towards handcrafted items. Um, there's something about it that is somewhat of the antipode of what it is that they're doing in
Yeah.
society, and I think that they they're drawn towards that, you know. I mean, I most people that live in the city yearn to go camping out in the woods, you know?
Right.
And a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
people that live out in the woods just want to go and visit the city. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's as simple as that in some ways, but blacksmithing itself was very much dying for a very long time because of industrialization, at least in the United States. I know in Russia and in uh, Slavic countries, especially in the USSR, like
Oh, yeah.
post USSR, especially like they really seem to maintain modern industrialized metalworking
Mm-hmm.
practices alongside traditional metalworking practices, and there was a lot of pride that went along with that, and that allowed those practices in terms of the art to survive. But I don't believe that a lot of the more folkloric practices survived. And
Yeah.
so the only place that I see that the folkloric aspects of and folk magic aspects of blacksmithing survived were in the grimoires
Mm-hmm.
and the written black books, especially within the Scandinavian black book traditions. And in those traditions, those were mostly, occultists or practitioners that were interested in filtering through and finding these old black books and reading them, and they weren't always necessarily uh, blacksmiths themselves, but they understood the information that was written down by, say, blacksmiths who are also practitioners, because
Mm.
that's something that you need to that needs to be said. I don't believe that all blacksmiths were practicing magic
No, no, I
as a
don't.
part of their
Yeah,
trade, but I
probably
believe
not.
that just like everyone has magic within their trade, like we all have like tricks, you know, little tricks that we do that we learn, that we understand,
Mhm.
and to us it might be magic, and some people, like, and I think in some times in history magic wasn't considered any different than learning any other tool or
Mm.
practice or skill or anything like that. So
Yeah, I can definitely see. I mean, I can see that. I don't think everybody's conscious of their magic. I want to go to what you said earlier because you brought up something that made me think of a pendulum swinging on one way, all these people in this technology fields where it sounds like the loose essence of who they are, and therefore they feel empty inside. And so the pendulum for them swings so far off, they almost organically seek something otherworldly, magical, handmade, primal, right? I mean, this happens. I mean, there's something primal when you have
yeah,
something like this. There's absolutely no denying it. And there's something immediately magical in it as well.
yeah,
Do you think that that's actually a good thing, that it's a pendulum swings to such extent that it attracts all of these people who are now don't even know what they're holding in their hand, and they're just acquiring more and more in order to feel as if their life is fulfilled?
yeah. Well, my hope is that the object that they hold in their hand, especially if it's something that I make, literally guides their movement. It guides their hand. It moves their hand. That it's
Ooh, I like that.
um that they're able to think of it. They're able to sense, at least, that it has an autonomy and a power of its own that they can allow to guide their own movements, and their soul as they do the work that they do. That's at least what I would hope. But
Yeah.
I think that that is the primordial. I think that like these primal things lead down to like an instinct level where we
Yeah.
don't necessarily see the separation or the difference between us and our surroundings, and that
Yeah.
things work as one.
It's almost like when you hold this eye, for me, it's almost something visceral because I mean, a lot of things you craft to go back in history. I mean, they're historical representation that
Mhm.
were used at one time or another. So it should make sense that collectively they still within our consciousness. So if we hold something from our history, even if it's not all my history, it should bring something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, agreed.
Alchemy in of itself is very misunderstood, and people throw alchemy all around, right? And there's different spheres of alchemy. In your view, how do you see alchemy in your work, and what does it mean to you?
So when I first started taking my first blacksmith class, I was also taking Secunda from Robert Bartlett, who I considered one of the few um, alchemical masters on the planet today. Uh, there, there are probably a handful, and we might actually be able to count them all in one hand at this point. Especially that have done it for a long time and aren't just coming to the work and self-appointing themselves as masters.
Well,
But
there's pros, there's pros.
but that people that understand the philosophy as well as the lab work, which they're you can't have one without the other. And I think that a lot of people, that's where we get the biggest misunderstanding, is that people think that they can just approach it from a philosophical standpoint. And I can tell you this, that every time I pick up a book on philosophical alchemy written by someone who's never done any lab work, uh, it's like a simple technique or a simple word
Yeah.
that's used for the process. It's very similar to blacksmithing in a lot of ways, in that I mean, they both have the same ancient ancestor. They all stem from the same thing, blacksmithing as well as, or metalwork in general, and alchemy. Both are the products of the sons of. They're born from the sons of fire labors, and so you can see that, like in, say, traditional witchcraft groups that are really into tubal cain and the blacksmith, like
Hmm.
concept and things like that. It's like Masons, or or any sort of secret society that works on this idea of that a trade society, or like an act where they think, well, he's doing this thing, and there's such, mystical significance to the hitting of the hammer onto the steel in this particular way, and so they'll coin onto the particular word that is, and then they'll really extrapolate upon it, where it's like, it's, if you were actually practicing blacksmith, you'd just be like, what what the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, yes, these things are important. Yes, they have some symbolism and some significance to them, of course. And there are depths to be explored within them. But I think that it's like a child that has never been to the zoo telling you these fantastic stories of the rhino, where if you've gone to the zoo and you've met a rhino at the zoo, like, you understand what a rhino is. But to a child who's never been to the zoo and has only heard about the zoo and has only heard about rhinos, you
Yeah.
can you start to see, like, oh my God, they're blowing this so out of proportion, and their imaginations are just running amok. And that's a lot of, like, if I read, say, Masonic literature about alchemy, and they're talking about alchemy, but they've never practiced lab alchemy, then they seem like children that have never been to the zoo that are trying to explain a rhino. And I mean, that goes with a lot of this stuff, the
Yes.
same with all the people that are into tubal cain and
Yes.
these blacksmiths traditions. None of them have done any blacksmithing, like, and it's
Yeah.
just, it I think it's like figurative versus operative
Yeah.
in the terms.
Yeah, armchair comes to mind, armchair
Yeah,
position versus,
absolutely. You know,
kitchen
yeah,
comes to mind. You can't just write a cookbook. You have to be there making
yes,
things up, right? You can't just describe how to cut vegetables. It's
right.
it's so much more than that. So
Absolutely. So yeah, alchemy is what led me to pursuing blacksmithing. I was very interested in uh the grimoire traditions and the production of magical items. And I have had produced magical items of my own throughout my life. And I was very interested in how they talk about it in the grimoire traditions from the Western occult
mhm,
practice. And when I started practicing lab alchemy, I started very quickly to understand that this was alchemical practice, that the people that were writing this down were doing so from a hermetically informed uh, alchemical philosophy on
mm,
and in practice of like this is how it's done. And if you look back historically, it just makes sense that the people at the time they would have been doing it in that context and with
yeah.
that way of thinking within that art and science that is alchemy. And so I started taking my first alchemy class or my first blacksmithing class at the same time I was taking my Secunda with Robert Bartlett, and I brought this up to him um, because we were crystallizing a plant salt in the hour of Jupiter, so that the plant salt would hold within it
Mm,
those influences from Jupiter. And I was like, well, when we take steel that's heated up in a mutable form and then crystallize it, so to
yeah.
speak, harden it, make it go from mutable to fixed, then we are locking within it what we quench it in, as well as the astrological times and things like that, the planetary influences at that moment. And it all just and he said, yes, that's exactly what we're doing. I hadn't really thought of that, but that's exactly what we're doing. And it just all clicked. And I was like, oh my God, that just opens up
Wow.
this
Yeah.
whole new field of practice in terms of the making of magical items, but also it links back to an ancient philosophy and worldview. So I'm thinking I'm probably one of the first people
Yeah, I was
to
gonna
really
say,
pick that up and to have had that experience and to understand it. And from what I can tell, everyone before they were just following recipes, like this is the formula, this is how you do it, and this is why you do it that way. Well, I don't even think there was a why, but this is what you need to do.
right.
This is what I did. And then you can look at it and go like, okay, well that's repeatable and we can repeat that. But I don't think that these people were really learning how to cook. I think that they were just following recipes.
Exactly. But you don't even, not only you learn how to cook, but you have an innate understanding
Yeah,
of how things go together and what they do specifically in a magical realm.
right.
Yeah.
And I think there was also by the people that were rereading these grimoires and trying to reproduce them, and then the traditions that got influenced by them, Wicca and all these other traditional witchcraft practices and things like that. I don't think that they really understood both blacksmithing or alchemy or these traditions per se. I don't really even think that a lot of the lodge magicians really understood that those aspects either. And so you see a lot of people adapting things or
Yeah.
misinterpreting things and reproducing things in ways that just don't necessarily make any sense. And I think a famous example of that is how some of the lodge traditions have reproduced the trident of Paracelsus.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of my favorite examples because it became incredibly fetishized within lodge magic traditions. The trident of Paracelsus was created in all kinds of really interesting, intricate ways with tremendous symbolism, and it's become like a very not common but known occult symbol and
Mhm.
item that is very much like fetishized.
Yeah.
But when you actually go back and read Paracelsus in like the translations from, you know, German, uh, you actually start to see that he made it out of uh, a thrown horseshoe.
Really?
So the Trident of Paracelsus, he says to make out of a thrown horseshoe, which folklorically he was taking that from all of the folklore of his era that had accumulated through centuries, you know, like the power of the thrown horseshoe. I mean, thrown horseshoes are still to this day one of the most common superstitions known, even though we don't have thrown horseshoes too often anymore.
Yeah.
But that's like way far away from all the different
Interesting.
interpretations of this, and all these, the lodge magicians very strictly telling you that this has to be done and it has to be made of ebony, and all these things, you know, are cast from 7 different metals and all this stuff. Well, and none of it says to do that. The original Paracelsian, you know, like formula for it was pretty simple. And it's just really interesting to see how far removed
Oh,
from
wow.
it had gotten, you know, from the original. But I mean, I
Yeah.
think a lot of things are like that in magic.
Yeah, oh, a lot. It makes me think how a lot of, I mean, I see today on Instagram so many people who are blacksmith, claiming to be blacksmiths. I mean, I've seen your profile has been copied. People have been copying your art. Um,
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's really, it's unfortunate. Do you think that's a problematic for people who genuinely want very special, magical, traditionally made items? Do you think it's problematic for people to distinguish?
Well, it's definitely a sore subject for me,
Yeah.
when people reproduce my work, and I think and treat what I'm doing as kind of a gimmick, without understanding why I do it
Exactly.
or have any
Yeah.
background in studying any of this work. I've had people, there's a blacksmith up in Canada who was like, he was one of the first. He started quenching his stuff in quartz crystal moon water, and it killed me.
Is there like even any reasoning for doing that? That sounds,
No, I mean, it doesn't make any sense either. I mean, from an alchemical, I mean, it makes sense if you totally subscribe to like a new age sort of concept of things. You know, it's like
yeah.
that, you know, quartz crystal moon water. It's very new age thing, but there's no like foundation in it at all, philosophically speaking or
Ouch.
otherwise. You know, like, and
Y-
so it's, and from an alchemical standpoint, you would have to, you know, you would have to make a gem oil. You'd have to, for me personally, from the way that I do things and the way that I understand alchemy, is that in order for, like, say a quartz crystal, if you wanted the virtues of the quartz crystal to be transferred to water, or and then to be transferred to steel,
Mhm.
you would have to liberate the quartz crystal from its physical form by dissolving it, probably in agua regis, and then, you know, creating a uh spagyric of it. You would have to distill it and create an oil, and then after you did that, you would be able to, excuse me, transfer transfer the oil of of which is the soul, right? The soul of quartz now to the steel. So what we're doing is we're taking souls
Mhm.
from different things, or soul parts, or, you
Right.
know, the soul, the sulfur, and putting it into the plant, or the steel, what, or copper or brass or whatever, you know, that we're transferring it to, which will then be able to hold it and hold those virtues. um so when I see someone doing something like that,
Yeah.
I'm like,
I
You're
bet.
not doing any service to this. You're making it a cliche, you're making it a joke, you're not actually, you have no concept of the way this is done, the philosophies behind it. And it's just another way to make money. It's the and I think, a lot of the people that have imitated my work, I mean, it's just it's capitalism driven, they're just trying
Sure.
to, they see a guy who figured out a way to make some money selling these things. And so they're like, well, I can do that. And so they start doing it and they start coming up with whatever. And there's some sincere people that are trying, that believe in it, and they're trying to do it too. And my hat's off to them. I think that that's cool.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I mean,
especially if
I
they,
think there's difference, I think, right? Everybody's starting somewhere, right? And
yeah,
sometimes you're lost, you don't know, but you're sincerely not trying to fuck things up and quench things in crystal water.
right.
And then there's people who knows that it's not gonna work. They know that they're just putting whatever it is out there to make it saleable, because that's a money grab. That's people gonna gravitate.
Yeah.
And it's sad. And I mean, when I got introduced to your items, and it's just, I can't explain, it resonated with me. Even if I don't use items that are important to me, and I didn't even know what quenching was, like for example, this bowl came with quenching options, and I remember I emailed you and asked what the hell is quenching, and you probably thought, okay, this is like a customer 101 idiot here. Probably told you a lot more about my lack of knowledge in these items. But there was genuine desire to understand, because
Yeah.
these items are important.
Yeah.
For people who truly looking for things to be able to, for these tools and their tools to be used in their act, do you think it's best to make your own?
I think if you made your own, I mean, it just depends, like what's your level of skill and knowledge. It's like you can sharpen a piece of rock and go out and harvest plants with it, you know. I mean, that's not too difficult to do.
No, and it's
And that
definitely,
rock could have a lot of meaning,
yeah,
that rock could have a lot of meaning to it. It just depends on what, like where you found the rock, or the conditions, and the time of year, the month, or maybe a holiday that you found that rock or made that sort of thing. I think there's definitely room for people to be making their own magical items, especially, but um there are things that you use ritually, and then there are things that actually have like magical properties imbued into them through the work that you're
yeah.
doing. And I think one of the interesting examples of that, I was talking on a witchcraft forum, which I don't really do very often anymore, but someone brought up knives and I had to chime in. And I'm glad I did. It was, it was refreshing to talk on a forum and not be disgusting and horrible. And and so I someone had talked about, you know, created a discussion about magical knives, and I was like, well, there are different levels of like magical knives, you know, and I'm not going to compare it to like Dungeons and Dragons or some fantasy role playing game or something like that,
Yeah.
but there are grades or levels of just how goddamn magical it is, and that is not something that's new. I think that's something that was a long time ago, and I think that if you had like a practitioner that was back in, say, like uh the 1500s in uh Sweden, for example, and they had met another practitioner that had the a same knife, and it was, they
Hmm.
were both made it from regret steel, and they were both, comparing notes like, oh, well, does yours have like, you know, three different types of regret steel, or seven or nine, or was it made on this holiday or this holiday or
Hmm.
this sacred day, or was it made on this, or like, was this done to it, and was it quenched in this? And I think the ones that had, if they were to lay them side by side, I think that the ones that had all of these check marks next to them, I think that they would both be in agreement and probably in awe of the person that had the one that had the most
Mm.
boxes checked, like, oh wow, well, okay. All right, well, that is something incredible. I mean, they would both be like, wow, the level of work that took, the
Yeah.
amount of time that took, the resources that took, that trumps all. But ultimately, I think at the end of the game, the end of the day, it depends on who's holding it, you know,
Ah,
as far as like what they can do with it.
right.
And I think that's
Yeah.
something that people need reminded of sometimes, is that it's not necessarily just how powerful your tools are, it's whether or not you know how to use it. Because I think, some of the greatest work can be done with the littlest of things, like a Marlboro cigarette and a fistful of dirt.
Oh, oh no, no, exactly. I think we forget sometimes the simplicity of it. Now, we talked a little bit about alchemy, and to me, the way I see, especially as a psychologist, it's a transformative process where you're working on something, but inadvertently, it's obviously definitely works on you too.
Yeah.
And for you, you're working with your hands, and when you're working with metal, it also transforms you. What has that been like for you over the years? Because you've been doing blacksmithing for how long?
I've only been doing it for 6 years.
For 6 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's long. Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't seem like you. Do you feel like it's a long time or?
Yeah. Well, I mean, 2 of those years were the really hard COVID years, so it's that's where things got real serious, where was all that I did, like that's when things really exploded, and customers were buying things. People wanted magic in their lives during that time, especially, and I can't blame them. I did too,
Yeah.
but the the busyness of it, and just working and throwing yourself into that work and just doing nothing but working during that time was something that was kind of mind-blowing. But my skills really developed during that time, probably exponentially, because that was all I was doing. I mean, I was working 7 days a week and probably like 12-hour days, so
Yeah, and you work in, I mean, I saw some of your clips on Instagram. You work in, I mean, obviously you have to work in extremely next to the heat. I mean, you work in this fire, it's right next to the, you have to be able to melt, to be able to bend, to be able to be flexible with the things you work with.
yeah.
That's proximity to heat. That's proximity to just what you're in. What does it do to your psyche?
uh it makes you hard. It makes you very hard. It makes you I think that the brutal reality of uh re, martial magic or martial philosophy starts to really sort of crystallize within your psyche and in your soul, within your persona, while you're working with steel. um I think that I've gained insights. I ruminate on those that have wronged me quite a bit while working.
Ooh,
I
interesting.
ruminate on it a lot. I think about things that were done without integrity quite a bit, that other people have done. I think about my own responses to when I have dealt with people. Um, you get tough uh, real quick doing this sort of thing. Your injuries are daily. Um, your hands become mangled and
Yeah.
strong and large. Um, it's really weird to go from working in mental health and having, like, um, small hands to becoming someone with large hands, you know? It,
Yeah.
I think that was a weird thing, hands that are covered in scars and iron oxide that doesn't come off until the layers of skin have all, if you don't work for a long period of time and you shower and everything like that, then finally, maybe after a couple of weeks, you'll start to get hands that don't look dirty anymore. But
Yeah.
it just really, it marks you.
Yeah.
So I think you have a lot of time to contemplate these martial things. And so I always have been bent that way, like I'm ruled by Mars and I'm named after Mars. And so, well, my name actually means mighty warrior, valiant son of fire. And the sons of
You
fire were
gotta be
the
shitting
smiths
me.
and the blacksmith. So it was kind of like I was set up from birth with this
For
whole thing.
sure.
So like the warrior aspect of it, and I do think that there is a very martial warrior aspect to blacksmithing. I think it's a dangerous job, and it
Yeah.
requires someone that's very triggered by adrenaline, that people that would be like police officers, soldiers, firemen, mental health workers, like that was me, like I was always centered by violence. I was always centered by um when other people's needs outweighed my own, like I became centered and grounded and clear within myself. And so when I found blacksmithing, I became centered and clear within myself every day that I worked. And so that became my working meditation. And so that sort of sense of centeredness and purpose and groundedness, I think most people go their entire lives without ever finding that. And when you find that within something that also sustains you on all levels of your being, it's very powerful. And I think that, I don't know if everyone gets that from that work, but me personally, I do. And
Wow.
I think it's interesting. I was talking with someone the other day, and I think that you, as you're a therapist, and I, used to be. You're probably aware of Ken Wilber's work, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So you remember his, integral psychology, and then using the centaur as like a symbolism,
Yep.
right? So I think that as a blacksmith, this is the
Oh,
first time in my life that I've ever been talked down to as a stupid person, because I work with my hands. I've never in
wow.
my life ever
Yeah.
been approached as someone that is lesser than someone else. Like in a society, like if you work as a psychologist or a mental health professional in some way, shape, or form, people give you the respect if they, even if they're, you know, they
Yeah,
see
for
themselves as
sure.
having higher class or
Yeah.
clout or whatever because of their careers or what have you. Uh, but like working in mental health, I never was talked down to in that way. But now working as a blacksmith, I get talked down to as being a uh just a dumb person that makes things with his hands, or someone that had to choose a trade because they just weren't smart enough to work with their heads, you know
Wow. Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
find that so hilarious because I'm so familiar with Ken Wilber's work and this concept of the
Exactly.
centaur, of like finding balance between, like the mind and the
Yep.
body, and finding that integral,
That is so
like sort of
interesting.
core that allows your central pillar to be
Exactly.
clear, like, and I don't think these people are very clear.
No, no, well, definitely not. I mean,
And so their bias and their cultural bias is to like someone that is just making them their opus magnus, their magical tool and things. I'm like,
wow.
you
Yeah, the
you don't
projections are all over the
you
place.
don't get this at all, do you, pal?
Wow.
But it's very interesting. This is a little bit of classism that I found
Yeah.
working in this field, that I
Oh,
wasn't expecting.
it's very interesting what you say because any kind of work, and I think about farmers a lot, and another profession that gets dismissed. You're too stupid to go to school, so you become a farmer. But talk about a person that is so attuned, not only with earth and cycles, but attuned within themselves. Because I think when you work with your hands, you spend so much time doing, and therefore you also spend so much time internally meditating
Hmm.
and internally learning about yourself.
Hmm.
and you become much more, I think, in alignment with yourselves than people who don't. So it's really interesting what you say. And your hands, I mean, I can see your hands just from the screen, you know, they carried today's work when you came home. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, he tells a story when you work in, and I can totally see how it hardens a person.
Well, it's funny because it's funny that you mentioned farmers, because I grew up a farm kid, grew up on a farm. And so my neighbors were farm kids, acres and acres, miles away. Didn't grow up in a neighborhood. And so, we'd walk miles or ride our bikes for miles and miles to our friend's house. Logging trucks buzzing past us and stuff like that, no parental supervision at
The
all.
best times.
Yeah, right. And those kids, a lot of those kids, they grew up with large farms, working very hard, and they were straight A students. Their parents were college educated and very disciplined, and demanded that their kids also attend college. And they were exceptional human beings. And I think that um, these stereotypes about farmers even sometimes come from people that are basically forced into having to sustain themselves any way they can
Exactly.
because of poverty and because of exploitation of other people. I think that those are the things that we don't talk about when we talk about these things. I think human potential is actually
Yeah.
quite huge, if people are given an opportunity, but I think those opportunities are exploited by other people.
Yeah.
And I think that's the problem.
Well, among many other problems, but yeah, I think that it's very very skewed. I find the most interesting, the most relevant people are people who actually do work with their hands, or people who actually make things
Yeah.
one way or another, um when
Yeah,
you
the majority of the people that I know that are in my community have genius level IQs. They are the people that make this their hobby tend to be engineers, lawyers, doctors. One of my teachers is a retired dentist. Um, and it's not a cheap hobby. You have to, in order to, like, I mean, you'd have to have a lot of money in order to make this a hobby. If
yes.
you want to be good at it or pursue it really intensely,
Yeah,
and the other people, they have to be pretty sharp entrepreneurs. They have to figure out how to do it, or they get into architectural steel, or the people that get into architectural steel, they have to read schematics, they have to work with engineers, they're extremely intelligent
oh
people as
yeah,
well as artistic. And so once again, it's that centaur thing, it just keeps
I
popping up in
know.
my mind, is that the people that are really that have been pursuing this work, they propelled society itself. I mean, the Eiffel Tower was made by these people.
I
You know,
know.
I
I
mean,
know. Yeah.
the ingenuity behind it is
Mm-hmm.
mind blowing.
Yeah,
Just how we created these alloys and explored this stuff. It wasn't done by a guy sitting in, like an ivory tower. Like, this was done by people that were working it and doing it themselves. And we forget that
oh
because
yeah.
society gets so, like, segmented, the more complex it gets. uh but yeah, I digress.
Well, I think that's, I mean, I'm totally there with you. So the fucking society will try to escape. My question was, when you are working with metal and it's working on you, when you have accidents, which I'm sure you have had, and
Hmm.
maybe sometimes still have, when you have accidents and shit backfires, do you ever notice that those accidents parallel something internally happening within you?
Well, you can't help but do that. You can't help but reflect on those things. I mean, if you're a magically minded person in general, you definitely start asking questions. I think, yeah, I can't definitely. I can't really off the top of my head um think back to it, but I think along those lines is that the there's a you know, I wouldn't call it superstition, but there's definitely a thing that I find with the people that I work with that are magically minded, students, things like that, like if you're making something for someone, a client or a customer orders something and wants it done, and shit goes south nonstop, or the entire job is a total pain in the ass, you know, that customer is probably a fucker.
Oh, I love that.
You
Oh,
know,
I love that.
they probably are a total shithead, and they're probably going to really suffer with it. They're going to abuse the tool. It's gonna the things that they do is gonna backfire, and it's just not gonna be any
You
good.
can just tell, you can just feel it.
Yeah, you can just feel it. You're just like, this person is a pain in the ass and is gonna do pain in the ass work with it.
So, what are you doing? I mean, what are you doing? It sounds like what happens to you is that you struggle with an item just like somebody would struggle with a person in real life, just as if that customer was sitting in your shop talking to you, going
Yeah,
through the same struggle. Yeah.
yeah. That's what it feels like. And it's weird because like my students, without me ever even having like said that to them, they'll be like, whoever, like my wife has said that, like whoever that's going to is just got to be a real piece of work, you know, and like, and and my students have said that, so it's like I've had to sit back and like reflect on it and go like, I don't think it's me. Like this isn't me. This is definitely like not just my belief that I
No,
think
no,
about
no, no,
this. I
no,
think this
it's
is
not
very
just
common.
yours. There's
And
super.
I'm sure other people have felt that, that make magical items for other people. They've probably thought that. If you're doing like candle burning work or conjure work for someone as a, folk magic practitioner, and let's say you're doing a candle burning, and the candle like almost starts a fire in your house. Something very simple. Let's say that it's a reconciliation spell, right? Like, I want to get back together with my lover, and like it starts a fire, and you have to take it outside, and the whole thing, just the label burns off of it, and it's just covered in black soot. How would you read that candle?
I can imagine. Wow.
So
I
like,
don't
how
think
would
it's
you read the making? So how would you use divination
exactly.
as a way of reading the production of a magical item? I mean, God, I get feedback sometimes, unsolicited feedback on the things that I make from people. People love to do that. It's the problem with the Yelp culture, right? I'm not. I don't want your feedback.
Yeah,
I don't want a review. I hate reviews. I don't want to. I don't care. I don't read them. I think it sucks that people feel that they need to. I'll tell you this for a fact. The only person that a blacksmith or a bladesmith is going to listen to is someone who has more skill than they do at what they do.
yeah, I bet.
And
I
it's
bet.
like, if you got
Yeah,
reviews and feedback from your clients in mental health, it might be, you might want to listen to it, because you're really affecting their mental health, and you can listen to their feedback, but really in the back of your mind you might be like, they're just deflecting, or they're, like not really wanting to do the work or whatever. But if one of your seniors that had been
for
doing the
sure.
work that you are doing, that was specialized in what you specialized
For
in
sure.
for the last 50 years, comes to you and go like, hey, I've been going over your notes like you asked me to, and you know what, you really are coming on way too strong and pushing your own agenda with too many of your clients. And you'd listen to that and you'd be
For
like,
sure.
shit, you're absolutely right. I fucked up. This is, I need to change my approach and maybe do some personal reflection and like really work on myself. But that's not going to be the same if somebody's just like, you're a dick. Like, I don't like the way you did this. I think you come off too strong, you know, like, it's just not going to be the same. So,
Yeah.
goddamn, I get reviews still, you just can't get away from it,
Oh
and
man.
unsolicited,
Yeah.
feedback,
The
and
entitlement. The entitlement of consumerism today. I bought something from you, so I have a right to tell you that I got it, and yada 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 yada. It's
yeah,
very. But you know what you said earlier. It's not a superstition. My mom has the same thing when she cooks. When she cooks for somebody's birthday, whatnot, and if whatever she cooks doesn't come out, she goes, "Shitty person. That's a fucking shitty person."
okay,
So
yes,
and I pay attention to that. If I have a guest coming
beautiful,
over and I'm cooking for that guest, and my whole cooking goes awry, I go, mother, my red flag goes up. This is, it's not a superstition. I think there's something energetically you're picking up. Whatever you're
yeah,
doing is picking up.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I got feedback from someone today, and I just didn't want to hear it. I didn't, and it was after uh it had been shipped to them, and part of it broke in shipping.
Hmm.
And once I got, like they got it, they sent it back to me. I remade it and then shipped it back to them. And then I get their feedback today, their unsolicited feedback, and I was just like, God, okay, you need to learn to make it yourself. And I'm gonna tell you this: it was broken by you before you even bought it.
Oh, I love that.
You
I
know?
loved it. And I wish people paid attention I wish we as customers paid attention to also how things arrive to us.
Yeah,
What that might be telling us about ourselves.
yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
And I think that is way overlooked. There's a thing too in terms of buying magical items, is that there's an old belief that you're not supposed to haggle over it, because like if you want it to be of lesser value than what the person is that produced it is selling it to you for, then what you're doing is you're going to lower the potency of the thing that the work that you're going to be doing with it. And I think that goes for a lot of things, like the person that gave me that feedback, they're probably going to be second guessing or the value and the quality of the work that they'll do with it themselves, But we also live in a day and age where people just will buy and collect things that don't even have magical beliefs necessarily at all. They just think it's going to be worth something of value because that person's popular or their work is popular or it's
yes.
an art thing, I
Yep.
mean, I saw one time I made this one-off, and it was a sickle, a Saturn sickle, and I had done some special things that I don't do with anything else with it. And I really enjoyed it. I put a lot of myself into it. It was really nice, and I found it on sale. Someone was reselling it or had just bought it from someone, and they were reselling it again on an occult book forum of collectors. And I was like,
That hurts.
why wouldn't you? I mean, I understand people buy and collect occult items and that are going to be a one-off, and they think that's
Yeah.
going to have value, and then they try to sell it. But I mean, I'm a living artist that's still producing these things. Like, why don't you just like buy it or have me just make you one? Like,
Yeah.
why is it this one-off sort of thing? Like from an artist standpoint,
Yeah.
you're like, oh, cool. Well, I guess my art is getting,
Yeah.
valuable
But
or
at the same
commodified
time,
in a very interesting way. But it's like, why
yeah.
cheat the artist, the living artist who's making a living off of
Yeah.
doing
You're
this by
making
like,
money off your notoriety. I mean, it reminds
you're
me of
right.
like tarot decks when a tarot creator makes a limited edition and then they decide not to make it anymore, but they're still living artists. And
Yeah.
then like, oh, because it's out of print, I'm gonna sell it for $1,000 and I'm gonna now capitalize on your art.
Well, I think publishers do that to create, like they buy into the limited edition thing, and they try to do that because I think that it immediately increases the value of the work that they're doing as well as the demand for it. So I mean, there's a logic behind that. I know artists do a similar thing, but
I guess,
it all
yeah,
stems from the wine industry.
yeah. But I'm thinking like more like indie artists, like if I made deck and and then I see my deck $1,000 on eBay, you know, and it's like, I don't know. It's
You
really,
didn't make $1,000 for it, you know?
yeah. I mean, people just
Yeah.
have really, I think, pretty fucked up relationship today with money and items and your,
Art in general. Yeah,
yeah,
I
yeah.
agree. You know, I think it's very weird. My friends that do this sort of work, we always joke that the sculptors that you see, the sculptures that you see in city parks and in industrial parks and corporations and things like that, they're just they're wavy statues. They're just wavy. They're just wavy. They're just wavy objects. And that if we just learned how to make wavy objects, we'd be rich. And and that all it really takes to get really wealthy as an artist in the metal art community is to just learn how to make wavy objects. And the bigger the better. The bigger the wavy and the more expensive of a wavy object you can make, the more money you'll make for it. But that ultimately it's just legal money laundering.
Yeah. Oh no, no, for sure. I mean, uh, how do you mentioned that the working with metal makes you harder as a person. How does
Yeah.
it also not, with everything else going on, and so many people who are blacksmithing and they're not even imbibing items with magic at all, with everything going on, how do you also not become a bitter person?
Well, I think, you know, if the harder things are, it's interesting. They can also become more brittle,
Yeah.
you know. I think that it's a very painful business to be in. I mean, I'm not going to put myself up there with like maybe coal miners, but I mean, it's not it's not an easy job. And you know, I think a lot of people um find very unhealthy coping mechanisms to deal with pain and things like that. You know, it's like so you know, a lot of people become alcoholics or drug addicts and things like that. I think it's very difficult
Yeah.
to do this sort of work and not, and you know, I think any sort of martial practice is like that too. I think, you know,
Exactly.
like whether you're a cop or a fireman or, you know, like anyone that is, you know, connected heavily towards any sort of thing that's martial. And by martial, for those that are listening, I'm meaning Mars, you know, related to Mars or corresponding to Mars. I think that there is a tremendous psychological,
Hmm.
somatic body load that you end up, you know, like taking on. And it's rough, I think. I think that it's rough. I think like uh it does, you know, martial things. You have to do cleansing work and you have to do things that channel that energy in a different way. You know, like it can be easy to just be like uh with relationships with people, just be like, fuck them. You know, like you cross a line, any line, it doesn't matter how big the line is. If you cross that line, you're gone, you're done, you're toast.
Yeah,
Put
and
me into my
being a
anvil.
Scorpio, we're already like that. Right? Being Scorpio, I mean, you're Scorpio, I'm Scorpio. Being
Yeah,
Scorpio, we're already innately like that. I
yeah.
mean, I have Mars in communication house, so for me, it's like I'm going to be nice, nice. The minute you cross it, it's like no.
No, I know it's tough. I mean, I'm all fire and water and air, you know, like mostly fire and water, but you know, I've got no earth in my chart whatsoever. I couldn't
Ooh,
do what I do without Katamara, my wife.
yeah. This is what I was gonna say. I was listening to you talking about hardening, and I was thinking to what extent Karamara might be actually softening you, because she works. She also works
I
not
wouldn't say I wouldn't say she softens me at all.
Oh, really?
No, no, no. She
She how
grounds
does
me
she?
though. She
Oh, she
grounds me
wants you.
definitely. She
Okay.
definitely grounds me. She's a double Virgo with a Taurus moon. So she's
Oh,
like she's very, very, very earth, you know,
yeah,
like and
yeah.
she definitely has, you know, kept me on my game, kept me on my ball and made it so that the things that I wouldn't want to do become more of a habit, and but I'm also going to be a rebellious asshole and be like, no, I'm not going to do any of those things that are good for
Yeah,
either of us.
why not? Why not? But yeah,
Yeah,
I was thinking how she might be, but I guess she's not softening you, she's grounding you.
she's
Um,
definitely grounding
yeah,
me.
because she definitely works in alchemy too, but she works in alchemy
Yeah,
with, different items. I noticed that she makes essential oil. I have a lot of her oils. I have like
yeah.
4 now on my desk. And I think you two are like perfect match. So to
Thank
wrap it up, because I want to be conscious of your time, I want to finish up on this. I want to introduce this. So this is interesting to me.
you. I
I don't know if you remember this.
do.
This is perfume of Lilith, and I was like, send you a picture, and I said, Marcus, what the heck is this? And you said, oh, I aromatizer. I can't even pronounce it. And you said, I have one, so I'll just send you one as a gift, which was very nice because I was like, I want this. I don't know what the fuck is this. But I do now. And mine is halfway empty. This is how much I love this one. This is
Yeah.
so you also, have House of Orpheus, where you
Uh-huh.
make perfumes and colognes. And that's such a different departure from metal. I mean, right, from our conversation and how metal has hardened you. Now I'm thinking, what the fuck? Like, how did that happen?
They're both the products of fire, like both of them are the products of fire. You can't have essential oils, you can't have perfumes without fire. Like fire is the one thing that like brings it all together. The sons of fire were the alchemists, and the alchemists
Mm.
and the blacksmiths all came from a single origin point, a sorcerer who mastered fire. And for me, so in alchemy, you start off with the plant realm, and then you move over to animalia, and then you move to metals. Metals being the final stage of alchemical practice within lab work. So for me, like it just seemed like, of course, like plants were always a focus of my work. Animal spirit work, things like that were always a focus for me, and working with animalia, making animal simples, even stuff like that. And then going to metal, it just seemed like a very natural progression.
Yeah,
My
but it's
particular
still,
focus was iron.
different. I mean, I'm picturing you in your shop hardening the metal, and I'm picturing you in your other shop meddling with oils and
Well,
combining.
my first business was an essential oil distillation business where I harvested plants, and then my business partner and I, that I taught how to distill, we created a large still, from a stainless steel, food grade, 55-gallon drum, which is a lot of how it's done in third world countries as well. And we created a large still, made had a giant condenser made at a local fabrication shop, and ran his well water through it, and we would distill that for several days. And I would be outside watching it and trying to, maintaining it in the middle of the dead of winter, and it's 22 degrees, and I would just be hugging the still for warmth, like out in this shed,
Mhm.
holding on to the still. And that's how I met Kat. That's how I met Katamara. She
Yeah.
she was, you know, uh doing distillation work at the
Mm.
time, and alchemical work. And I had these different visions from different spirits and things like that, telling me that, because I was single at the time, that uh not to settle for any woman that wasn't a witch, and that wasn't over, like that wasn't over 30,
Wow, specific.
and that would go out in the desert and distill sagebrush with you. And I was like, okay, all right, that's very specific. And then I met her, and she just fit the bill.
Oh my God.
And so she came over to my house to meet me and to see my big still, and that was how we met. She came over to check out my giant
Wow.
still, and that's
Such a great
that.
story.
Yeah. Um so I was into distillation, she was into distillation. She introduced me to working with Robert Bartlett, who I was already aware of one of his books and Spitjerics and
Mhm.
things like that. But and I was aware of alchemy, but it just didn't, you know, hadn't gotten as interested in pursuing it fully. But I definitely had because of alchemy. But I was always interested in just plant spirits because I had interacted and worked with so many in my personal practice, and um, going and practicing down in Peru and learning in Peruvian traditions, like the use of perfume was a huge part of it. And I had gotten massive messages from the spirits of flowers that were sprayed on me in a perfume that
Wow.
the curandero had made. And I was like, I started incorporating perfumes into my practice on a regular basis, and so I really wanted to work with that. But it's interesting, if you look at the African traditional religions, like the the god Ogun, like the god of blacksmithing and metalwork, is also the god that distills alcohol, you know, from what I understand, from what I'm told. Um, and so I thought that was really interesting, that there's a relationship and between the two, and it would make sense.
I mean, it makes, when you talk about it, it makes sense. I just, to me, this is like a different part of you that I see,
Yeah.
because it just seems like, yeah, it may be similar in essence, but it's also still very different as a work. And
Well, I mean,
I
in
love
my
this.
personal practice, if you'd ever seen me, I'd do some of the work that I had done. I would take like a mouthful of perfume. I would put it in my mouth, and then after cleansing someone with a shotgun that was dug up out of the desert, by running it over their body, doing the cleansing, of witchcraft done on them, I would then absorb that into the shotgun and then blast the perfume down the barrel towards the person that had done the
Wow.
witchcraft on that person. So I think if you saw my relationship with perfume,
It would change.
you
Yeah.
would change that perception a little bit, because I think that the way people perceive perfume is very
Delicate
you
and
know
soft and yeah, and like yeah. You're spot on, exactly. And
yeah,
you're not thinking about spitting it out of your mouth and turning it into fire.
exactly, yeah. So yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I stopped really focusing on the perfume world, is that I found that the consumer and the people that yeah, mostly the consumers and and also the producers and the community that revolves around it really just don't have the same perspective I do on it as a producer of it. And I really enjoyed it for a time, and I thought it was wonderful, but I think that the culture around perfume is just ridiculous, and I want nothing to do with it. um
Well, if it makes any difference, this is one of the only three perfumes I use, and um, it's like perfumes to me are
well,
very.
thank you. I mean, I love every one of my creations, but it's and I still make them, and I still provide them to people that care about them, but I don't promote it anymore, and I don't advertise. It's more, if you find me or you hear about me or something like that, my website is still up, but I don't promote it anymore. I don't try to sell it, and
Mm,
I just make sure that the people that love the work that I did still have access to it.
yeah,
And I think that that's I, you know I'm just kind of providing a service to people that kind of believed in the work,
yeah.
but I'm not trying to sell it
uh,
anymore to people.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you on that. Well, like I said, I'm gonna have to come back for, because this Lilith is, I can't even tell you how personal giving my relationship is with Lilith recently. It's like a little bit too spooky.
Oh,
But
well, Lilith is spooky. It really is.
yeah, so
Yeah.
um, but thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure to sit down with you and to really dive even deeper, and I really appreciate your time.
It's been a lot of fun, and I especially loved that you did bring up the perfume work that I've done, because it's not something that people
No.
about me anymore. And I find that very amusing, actually. But I was very happy to share with you the blowing perfume down the barrel of an antique shotgun that was dug up out of the desert by my grandfather. So I appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. That's a great story. It's from now on, change the way I see you. So I really appreciate it. But
Good.
yeah, again, thank you so much. Yeah. Don't hang
Glad.
up.